This is the video where things really get fun, trust me, okay? CSS is the greatest. You've slogged through the video about plain text, which was very long. You've slogged through the video about HTML, which I promised would be short and was even longer. So now here's CSS. It'll be a long video, but the payoffs will be massive. Oh, CSS, so amazing. CSS, often you'll find this in the form of a file, .css, although sometimes CSS code can be stuck in other places, as we'll see. CSS, even though the name is gorgeous, cascading style sheets. Cascading like a waterfall, a cascade, and style. Who could care about anything more than about style, the most important thing in the world? I include this ugly image of a waterfall, ugly yet gorgeous, to remind you of like what CSS is all about. CSS is about colors and shades and beautiful images. It's about seeing things in a beautiful way, which is HTML is not about, and plain text can be beautiful but in a minimalistic way. CSS, not minimalist. So in the olden days, there was no CSS, there was just HTML. So you had to put style information directly into HTML code. So if you wanted to make red text, for instance, there was a font element and an attribute color, and you would specify color equals red, and that's how something would show up as red. This does not happen anymore. You'd no longer put style information directly into HTML. I'd ask you how come, and since I can't talk to you right now, I think you might say something like, well, because not everyone wants to see a web page. Some people, like we talked about the example of blind people before, they listen to web pages, or maybe a web page is going to be, read aloud because someone's like an ebook type of a situation. So along the line, someone realized that HTML files are not just to be seen, they can be heard or experienced in other ways. So not everyone cares about style. Why would you put all of this stuff like display this as red when someone's not even going to look at it, they're going to listen to it. So this system developed where you would put style information, display information in a separate format, in a separate language. There are other advantages to separating them, but that's just an example. So CSS was adopted at a time when people started to really think we want to separate content from presentation. HTML would do content, presentation, visual display would be something that happens in CSS. So instead of saying anything about how to display information, HTML would really focus on organizing and describing content in a separate language. CSS will handle presentation. So CSS is pretty adaptable. There are 3 places that you can stick CSS code. You can stick it directly into an HTML element. If you use the attribute style, the attribute value of style can be any CSS you want to stick in. Another place, and this is what we're going to use in this example today, is in a special part of the HTML file in head called the style element. And the most common way is actually to make CSS in a separate file. And then within every HTML file who you want to style in a particular way, you put in a link element and say where to go find that CSS element. So like I said, mostly people use separate CSS files, and the reason is that if you have one file that controls, that has all this style information, you can use it to control the appearance of an unlimited number of web pages. So let's say you have like an old-fashioned website with thousands and thousands of individual pages, and you really liked this pink background for your website when you started it, but then at some point you decide, oh, actually, I don't think I want all of my websites to have a gross pink color. In the olden days, you'd have to go into each of those 1,000 pages and change the background properties. But if all of the files link to the same CSS file, then you just have to make one change in the CSS file, and they will all change. So like, oh, white, I now want white background. So you change one line in the CSS file, and now your whole website is white. It's pretty great. Okay, CSS is the best. It's incredible. I'm going to show you an example of what CSS can do, and then we're going to begin this really painful long slog through explaining what it is. So first the magic, then the painful long slog. Okay, I have a little website here open, and it's just like a simple HTML page. Yes, you can download this from my website if you want to see it and play around with it, But okay, here it is. It's called index.html. I've got it saved somewhere on my hard drive, and I'm going to go now find that. Here it is in Chrome. If I load it up, this is what I see. Okay, nothing special. It's pretty ugly. You got a link to Google. You got a link to a page that says zing, zing, zing and has a thunderbolt, and then you've got an image of some citrus fruit. It's sort of everything we learned last time, right? How to put an image in, how to do a link. Now, watch this. I'm now going to add one line of code, okay? One line of code. This line of code links my HTML file to a CSS file. Don't worry about the details, just know that now my HTML file sees a CSS file and is taking style information from it. I'm going to reload and you're not going to recognize it, okay? It's the same exact page, but by reloading it now, bronk, it looks pretty different, right? Now I've got this amazing clown background image, and I've got a big page of the main part where all the text is yellow with a thunderbolt background. There's like double outlining. There's a horrible green shadow. The font is different. There's a weird outline around the citrus image, blinking text. All of this happened in CSS. The best detail of all is that if you move the cursor outside the box, you get a smiley face. Your actual cursor changes, and then if you hover over a link, the cursor changes to a smaller version of that clown. Pretty gorgeous, and it all happens in CSS coding. All right. Okay, we'll close that beautiful, beautiful example, and we will go back to learning about how CSS works. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how the actual code level stuff of CSS works, and you're not going to understand it at first if you don't already know this stuff. You'll be like, what? I don't get it. You'll be confused. But then at the end of the video, we'll actually go in and play around with CSS, and that's when it's going to start making sense. But it's good to have all this vocabulary in mind before you start playing around so that then you will understand it. You got to put the two pieces together. Anyway, CSS looks like this. Okay, it looks nothing like HTML. The coding syntax is completely different. So the whole thing, this whole thing up here is called a Css Declaration Block. It's made up of the following parts. You've got a selector, that's this part here. It's just you write it before you write the rest. That says what we want to change the appearance of. Then you have a curly bracket. Yes, we've had all the different kinds of brackets, and now we're into the curly brackets. Then you have a property, and the property is followed by a colon, and then you put the value for that property, and then a semicolon. Then you can just put one if you want, but now you can put another property if you like after you do that semicolon. And then the syntax is the same. Property, colon, value, and you can have multiple values, then a semicolon, and then you can add more properties if you want, but in this example, I just have 2. So as with all computer languages, syntax is super important. So if you miss a curly bracket or open or close curly bracket, it'll really mess everything up. And if you miss a colon or semicolon, it will mess everything up. Semicolons are the hardest to remember, okay? Those little semicolons, you'll be very tempted to leave those out. But if you miss any of that, the browser won't understand your CSS declaration. So selectors say which parts of the HTML page you want to alter in appearance. You'll see more examples of this soon. There are 3 ways of doing a selector. Again, you'll be confused by this at first, but then it will all start to make sense. So if your selector is just something like this, just the name of an existing HTML element like P, we all know P is a paragraph, then everything you put in here will apply to every paragraph in your HTML file, every P element. There's a different way that if you put a period first, then the selector, preceded by that dot, is going to apply to every element that you've marked in your HTML document as having the class of blank. For instance, if in my HTML file I have a P space class, that's an attribute, equals blank attribute value, and then close my start tag, then all of the stuff I'm saying to do will only apply to elements with the class of blank. Again, file this away, it'll make sense in a bit. The other way is if you use a number sign. So if you use the number sign, then this selector will only apply to the single unique element that you've identified in your HTML document as having the ID that matches what you write up there. So if you have ID equals main text, it will look for this number sign main text in the CSS. I can call selectors, these kinds of selectors, class and ID selectors, whatever I want. They just need to match. So while class selectors might apply to all kinds of different elements within your HTML document, you can have a whole bunch of Ps that you want to style with blink. IDs are really just for a single element. There's just going to be one place in the file that matches. Okay, I'm going to summarize this and then we'll actually start playing with it so it'll make more sense. And I have actually one more example before we start playing. So to sum up CSS selectors, if the selector is just the name of an element, it will style all elements of that name in the HTML document. So you just have to use the existing name of the HTML element. If you put like EM as your selector, it will style all EM elements in the document. If it's preceded by a dot, then the CSS will style every element in the HTML document that has a corresponding, oh, there's an error in that slide, class equals attribute. So it will find anything that matches the class attribute. You invent the name, but it has to match. If it's preceded by a number sign, it will only apply to the single element that contains a corresponding ID equals attribute. So again, you invent the name, but it has to match. Okay, if you're confused, this will help, and then it'll really, really help when I start showing you how this works in practice. So imagine the following setup, okay? This is real CSS, and this is like real HTML. Imagine in your CSS you have a declaration block that is just P, okay? No period, no number sign, just P. So this is going to apply to every P element in your HTML file, and we've got a bunch of P elements in here. My property is color. That's a real CSS property, and that affects font color. So color, colon, blue, semicolon. So that is going to go into the HTML, find every P, and turn the text within every P blue. Now this one does have a dot, and it's dot yo yo yo. I just picked a stupid name to show you that you can call it whatever you want as long as it matches. So now it's going to go looking into the HTML file for any element that has the class attribute with the attribute value yo yo yo. So do we see any of these? Yes. Class equals yo yo yo. So this one is going to do the same thing as above, but for red, it'll change the color red. So this is just an element called span, but it's got the class yo yo yo, so everything within that element is now going to be red. And same down here, class equals yo yo yo, everything within that span element is going to turn red. Match, turn that red. Now this is the number sign, so that's now looking for an ID equals kablow, of which we have one up here, just a unique one for the number sign ones, ID equals kablow. That's going to change it green. So what it will look like on a web page is this, okay? It will turn that green, everything will be blue except the parts that I've specified as the class yo yo yo, which will be red. Just to prove that this is indeed true, I've got fanpage.html. Here you can see a full HTML document with the CSS up here in the header between in a style element, and then everything else is exactly as I showed it to you. And then I'm going to go into Chrome and I'm going to open that up in a new tab, open file, find it on my hard drive, there it is, open. And sure enough, just as I promised, that's how it works. Okay, so like I said, it's impossible to remember any of this stuff without actually seeing it happen, so let's play around. To do so, let's go back to that bare minimum file that we made last time. And I haven't changed it at all since I made it in the last video. Let's go to Chrome, and just to reload it. So this is exactly like we made it in the last video. So now we're going to start adding some CSS style to this, all right? So in head, after title, I'm still within the head, start in head tags. So I'm in the head element. I'm going to make a new element called style. I'll hit enter twice and then I'll close style. This is one way of entering CSS information, all right? Right inside the style element, inside head. This is one of 3 ways, and it's probably the easiest way to do it for us for right now. So how about, just like we said, we'll do the simple one where the selector is just P. So this will style anything down here in the body that is a paragraph. So open curly quotes. When I make CSS declarations, I like to do this, hit enter twice, and then close the curly brackets just so that I don't forget. So my attributes, like you need to learn attributes, but there's so many of them that don't worry about storing too many of them in your memory. One worth remembering is color. That's for font color. So attribute name, colon, and I'm going to say blue. Okay, so the instruction I've just given inside the style element in head is take every P and make it blue. Save. So I got some P's down here. I won't expect this to affect my H1 or my H2, but all my P's should now turn red. I mean blue, and they did. See, code works better than my brain. So cool. So it did the thing that I wanted it to do. Okay, let's do something else just for fun. This is an easy one. Let's take H1 elements, we have a few of them, and make those red. Save. Reload. Cool. I made that element red. And I have an H2 element too, so I will also color that. I'll make it green. Now, you see I'm just entering color names, and that's probably the easiest way of entering colors in CSS, but there's like a restricted number of words. Like if I write green and reload, it turns green. If I write like slightly light green with vomit hues and try to save that, CSS does not understand that extremely long thing, right? There's what is known as a restricted vocabulary. So if you want to know all the CSS colors, just Google CSS colors, and the first link will give you all of the CSS colors. So you can see that actually there are some nicer colors than just plain old green and stuff, like dark slate gray, which can be spelled the Canadian way as well as the American way, which I am totally going to pick. So if I make that H2, paste that in dark slate gray, and reload my page, ooh, now it's a nice, it's subtle, but I can see it. It's a nice slate gray. Okay, so now imagine the following situation. You got all your P's and your H1s are all the colors you want, but let's say I want this paragraph, only this paragraph here. I want this one not to be that ugly blue, but to be, say, this nice dark red color. Well, how do I get at it? It's a P, so if I change all P's to dark red, you know, if I change that, it's going to make them all dark red. I don't want them all to be dark red. Undo. I want the first and the last to be blue, but I want the middle one to be dark red. This is where you need classes. So I'm going to make a new CSS class called, I'm actually going to call it Classy, because I think that dark red color is very Ron Burgundy style classy. So anything, so to make a CSS class, you do that, you do the dot, right? So color dark red. Now anything, any element that I identify with the class classy will be dark red. So I said I wanted this paragraph to be dark red. I go into the start tag for that element and I say class equals classy. So I made up the name classy, right? It just needs to match. Text Wrangler is helpfully underlining a match. So now if I save that and reload, awesome. Just that paragraph is now dark red. This can apply not to just to paragraphs, but to any element. So say like I just want the word making to be dark red. I can put class equals classy into the EM element, and that too will have the effect of making just that element dark red. So that is also very fun. Okay, and I guess just to show how ID works, I would say don't worry a whole lot about ID right now, but just to prove that ID works, if I do hashtag, we'll call it like super big, I'm going to make a CSS where the font size, and yes, this is a very useful CSS property, I'll give it the value of 300%. That means that it will display the font size as 300% bigger. So if I give this H1 here, the ID equals super big, and save it and reload it, you'll see that now, that's not really even super big, is it? I want to make it super big. Let's make it 500%. Save, reload. So, okay, great. I'm changing font sizes. Okay, let's do more great CSS properties, things that really matter. Like on my computer, your default font in your browser might not be the same as mine. Mine looks like it's like Times New Roman, which I happen to find to be a pretty gross font. So I want to change the default font on my whole web page to be something that I like better. If I want to affect the entire web page, which element do I need to modify in CSS? Well, it's body. See, body? Body's like the master. Everything that's displayed in your website fits into body. So if I change something on the CSS for body, it will affect the whole website. So for instance, if I do body, and then I say background color, which is a CSS attribute that changes background color, and then I write, what is it? Cornflower blue. I think that, yeah, that's an actual CSS color. And I save that. Now my whole website has a new background color. See, because body is the most general element in the HTML document, changing something in body changes the whole thing. I'm not actually crazy about that cornflower blue. Is there something a little bit lighter that we could pick? Ooh, honeydew, lovely. I'm gonna grab the color honeydew, paste it in there, save it, reload it. Okay, still a little ugly, but nicer, kind of like a minty color. Okay, so I want to change not just the background, but like the default font for my whole page. So here's how you do fonts. It's a little bit weird, but the CSS thing is called font family. The reason you need to specify a font family is because not everyone who's viewing your website has the same fonts as you. Different people have different fonts installed on their computers, so you have to give it like a range of options. I'm going to say my first choice that I would like is Futura, which happens to be my very favorite font. My second choice for a font would be Impact, which is kind of ugly. Those of you using a PC, you probably are going to see Impact. My third choice is Helvetica, and after that I'm just like any sans serif font will do. So the way that your browser will see this code, and it will be like, okay, first choice is the font Futura. Do I have that? Yes, I will display it. If they don't have Futura, then they're like, okay, do I have Impact? Yes, I have it. If they don't have Impact, they go to Helvetica, and so on. So it's like a ranked series of choices. My first choice is Futura. Save. Reload. Oh, yes. No. I truly cannot say how much I love the font Futura. For me, my website just became really pretty. Makes a big difference, and you can see that it affects every single part of the page because head or body is the most general element, and so it applies down to everything. If I wanted to change the font of just a particular paragraph, like let's say I want this subheading here to be in a different font, I can't imagine why I would want to use a font other than Futura, but let's just say I do. I can add a new property to H2. I'll say font family. If your font name has more than one word with a space, you need to put quotation marks around it. So let's say that I'll pick Gaudi Old Style, which is a font I really like. It's my first choice. and Times New Roman, which is the font I really don't like, as my second choice, and serif. If they don't have those particular ones, save, reload. Okay, so now I've got, it's put it into a serif font, just the H2, right? Because I'm only modifying the H2 element. I'm going to go ahead and take that out because I don't actually think that looks nice. Reload. Awesome. Okay, so let's do a little bit more fun stuff and then we will stop. Okay, I'm going to show you a fun element. Div. Div just means like arbitrary division, but it's very commonly used to do things like, you'll notice that if I resize this page, I'm going to now actually make it a full-size web page. You see how the text goes right to the side of the page? It kind of looks terrible, right? Like very few web pages have this. Usually web pages will have like a bounded area in the middle where text actually goes and then like a background. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do it by making a div element. So inside body, I'm going to make this element called div, and I'm actually going to give it an ID. I'll call it main text. I want everything in my website to fit inside this div. I'm going to indent these so you can see how every part of my website is now sitting inside that div element. And I need to make a corresponding main text CSS ID. So right now, if I save it and reload it, you'll see that there's actually no change at all because I haven't said what to do within that div element. But as soon as I start specifying things, okay, so let's say that I want to, there's a property in CSS called width. So I want everything inside this div, everything here, to be constrained to a width of, let's say, 800 pixels. That's how you write 800 pixels, 800 px. If I save that and reload it, you can see, okay, you can kind of see that it's now being constrained. You can't really see the margins, but they're there. I don't like that it's left justified, so here, again, how do I know this stuff? Just because I've made a lot of web pages. If I want to center a div, I write margin 0 auto, save. That's just saying the margins on the top and bottom are 0, and then the margins on the right and left are automatic, which will end up centering it. Okay, see how much nicer this is starting to look. Now we have like center, the text makes a bit of sense. Let's say that I want this div to have a background color slightly different than the main website. So I'm going to go back to the CSS colors, which is another nice light color. Ooh, lavender blush is super nice. I want that one. So this one will have a background color of lavender blush. Save, go back here, reload. You see what's happening now? Now I can really see the boundaries of this new div that I made. And I can see the way that it's separating. I don't like how the text is running right up against the edge of the div. I want that to be a bit prettier. So I know that there's a property called padding, which will pad the inside edges of that div, and I'll set it to like 15 pixels. Save, reload. Doesn't that look nicer? Now there's a nice little pad that's put inside. Okay, it's starting to kind of look nice to me. I mean, my color selections aren't the best for fonts, but it's starting to look pretty good. Let's say I want a very subtle border around the outside. I want a border. When you specify the border property, you have to say how big you want it to be. I'll make mine 1 pixels. You have to say whether you want it to be solid or dotted or double. I'll just say solid. And then you have to say what color you want your border to be. How about light coral? That's super nice. Light coral. Save. Go back. Reload. And you can see that now that div has a beautiful light coral outlining on it. Let's say you've been to a website and you've noticed that some websites have like rounded edges on stuff. So how would you do that yourself? Well, you Google CSS rounded corners. The internet knows everything about HTML and CSS, right? This is where people actually make HTML and CSS. So Googling will always give you the answer you want. Yes, CSS, rounded corners, that's what I want. There's some good examples. It looks like this border radius property is what I want. I'm just going to grab it and stick it into my code with full confidence that that'll work. The 25 pixel radius, that describes like how sharp you want the edges to be, I'm guessing. I'm going to reload it, and oh yes, now I have nice rounded edges. 25 seems to have been pretty good. Let's make it a little bit bigger, just to see what it looks like. 50, reload, yeah, and that looks even better. Although my face is getting dangerously close to the edge. Okay, let's see. You've also been at websites and you've seen shadows. So CSS shadow. How do I give an element a shadow? CSS shadow effects. Okay, this is going to have what I want. You can give shadows to a box, or you can give shadows to text. I want the box shadow, so I'll keep scrolling until I find where that happens. Okay, there's some code. This one is kind of nicer because it's a bit blurry, so I'm going to copy the example code that they gave me. I'm going to stick it into my main text ID, save it, go back, reload it, and you can see, ooh, it's not super nice. It's a little bit too dark for my liking, but I have it. Okay, I won't get too picky right now. It's got a nice shadow. One more thing that I will show you, and then I'm done. Let's say that I want all my images to have a nice border as well. So image, that's going to affect all image elements. And I want border, let's say I want the border to be 5 pixels. I want it to be dotted for some reason. And I want it to be, what's a good color? How about, that's not bad, how about indigo? Indigo. Save. Reload. So you now see that every image now has kind of ugly, but a dotted indigo outline. Is there anything else that I have missed? I'll say no, but the thing that the key about all this CSS stuff is, yes, it's super pretty, you can do amazing things, but you can never remember everything. So whatever you want to know how to do, just Google it. If you want to, like, for instance, my challenge to you, background image CSS, Google it, follow these links, it will tell you how to do it, and then you can have incredible background images. Okay, that was a long one, but that's how CSS works, and it is so worth learning because it is so cool.